Chapter 22 to 28. With his grand plans for a hotel chain on his mind and was, for now, finished with the Black House, Chad had Boppy pop him over to the Godric's Hollow base. It was getting close to sunrise and was nearly time to get ready for Muggle school. Well, for Boppy to get prepared, Chad was going to have a pleasant sleep in his base surrounded by piles of cash and jewelry. In the UK, school started at age 5, and frankly, Chad was not interested in wasting his time finger painting and learning how to read and write. But there was a certain someone who could benefit from some education, his head elf Boppy. Although he was far from pleased at the situation, even Boppy had to admit that he was profiting from it. His speech had vastly improved, even with only 1 year surrounded by preschool children, and he was actually having fun playing around. Chad thought it was a win-win scenario. He got time to spend on his schemes, and Boppy got an induction and playtime as a reward for being a champ. Chad even noticed the vocabulary level of all his elves increase. The Dursleys had given Harry a proper sermon about not being a freak in public, and how nice they were, even to let him attend a school like a normal person. Suffice to say, the little psycho in training was excited to be leaving the cupboard and exploring the outside world and had assured his owners that he would not let anyone know he was a freak. Finally receiving a name must have helped solidify his need to obey, because when Chad scanned his mind to enforce him not to speak about his home life, he found only the need to make the Dursleys proud of him in his thoughts. It was pretty sad, but Chad just laid his compulsions and left. At least Dudley would be able to make friends. Unlike Ken and Harry, Chad wasn't that mean. But he had given Boppy strict guidelines when it came to Harry's behavior at school, and to his own as well. Harry was to be left to his own devices, but not leak any facts that could harm Chad's plans. If the police suddenly rocked up to check on child welfare, then Dumbles would be around to set things right. He would soon uncover that Chad was not the beaten sheep ready to be led to the slaughter, and he would then be promptly mind-raped. It was way too dangerous to give Dudley free rein, and Chad wasn't a hero to fix every injustice in the world. Especially when the little sh*t would have grown up into a brat that tormented Harry. So, free from any school drama, Chad had been living life large. Treated like a king by house elves, able to experiment and study medicine, and now free to focus on the building of his business empire. Well, after sleep, Chad found he was always tired in his child body, even with it regularly refreshed by his magic. When he woke up, it was to the sight of creatures less than pleasant to look at visage. He had forgotten to assign him something to do, and that had left the creepy little guy free rein in his base while Chad slept. Not that Chad was worried he would harm him, just that you should always give fanatics a clear guideline to operate with. There was no telling what they would get up to in trying to help you. Just look at Dobby's constant attempts to protect Ken and Harry Potter. Hello, creature. Have you had a good look around the place? Yes, master. Truly a reflection of your power to own so many elves and let them build their own town. The old elf said while jumping around similar to a 5-year-old child. He was like the house elf version of Benjamin Button. Good, when Boppy gets back from his duties, he will start your induction into what is required as one of my head elves. In the meantime, maybe you can take 10 of the new elf recruits and get House Black fixed up. Get you some practice managing other elves as head elf. Of course, master. It will be my pleasure to see it done, the giddy old elf said before teleporting away. With creature out of the way, it was time for Chad to see how his new wizard Slav recruits were doing. He had left 5 ninja elves in charge of Mesopotamian Inc., and the leader was an elf named Tookie. He was a rather calm and quiet elf that had earned his name displayed after killing 3 armed thugs in a gang dispute on a raid. Chad now had 20 or so named elves, and there was a long list of envious other elves jumping at the chance to slaughter someone and earn their name. Tookie! Chad called out. Seconds later a ninja elf appeared kneeling in front of him. How goes things at Mesopotamian Inc.? Any problems? No, master, the stupid wizards continue to break the magical contracts they signed. You now have 68 Muggleborns and 5 half-blood servants. 43 still under contract. The elf calmly replied. Half-bloods. How did you get them to sign a magical contract? They should know better. They were desperate, and your contract is seemingly innocent. Any problems dealing with them after they have broken their contracts? Chad asked curiously. He had left the whole process under Tookie's command after he had written up the contracts and gave them ideas on how to proceed. No, master. They are quite easy to deal with, as they are foolish. When they enter the containment cell and are stunned, they are all too happy to sign a new contract to be released. Without their wands, they are no threat to my men. Tookie explained. After a few more questions, Chad congratulated Tookie for his excellent work and let him get back to it. It seems that only 20% of those approached didn't sign a contract, and 70% that did end up signing did not even ask what work they would be doing. Those that asked were happy with the explanation of trade secrets, but that it was a legal and easy job. Little did they know that they would be cleaning and restoring public toilets. Chad had arranged the contact from the local government and was confident that he would soon have a national contract after they see what he does for a few shires' public toilets. There seemed to be no problem with the process of acquiring magical servants to work for elfin ink flipping houses. After inevitably breaking the magical contract that they foolishly signed, they wake up in a cell with an illusioned house elf presenting them a large book to sign to be released. Without their wands to check if it is magical in nature, they think it is merely a log or release form and sign it. They had no idea that there was a simple sticking charm on the first few pages to the front cover that listed out the new and much harsher magical contract. All they saw was a list of already signed names and space for them to do the same, not realizing that they had now become slaves in all but name. The new contract did not take their life or magic away if it was breached, that would be wasteful. No, it inflicted pain. Crucio curse level pain. Chad had designed the contact as a sort of slave conditioning/training plan that did not take free will away but punished traitorous thoughts. It is one thing to be able to survive pain when others are inflicting it on you, quite another when you are in control of your own suffering. Sure, at the start, there are a few that try to test the limits, but it does not last long. Having every nerve ending sending a signal of pain is insanity-inducing if prolonged. But Chad also had contingency plans for every scenario he could think of. If someone had the strength of will to destroy their own mind with pain, then they were knocked out and sent to him for a personality mind wipe. All general memories were left, but any sense of self was just gone, much like a case of amnesia. Then there was the list of rules and regulations that each new servant had to read after signing the contract book. This was the guideline that would train their dispositions into loyal and hardworking magical servants. It covered every loophole that Chad could think of, but he was not narcissistic enough to believe he knew everything. To cover that was a helpful little compulsion clause at the end. If you find a loophole that lets you break the spirit of the contract, then you are to apparate yourself to the training facility holding cell immediately. With his slaves finding new loopholes and having to report it to elves when they gain consciousness in a containment cell, they will all eventually be found. All in all, Chad was pretty proud of his setup. It would leave his servants with enough freedom of thought to handle unexpected situations, yet still have absolute loyalty, even if it is forced. After signing the contract book, they would be taught by Tookie and his team the values held by all house elves, and how to properly serve their unnamed master. With his devoted ninja elves showing them how to be proper servants, Chad was sure that they would be appropriately conditioned into respectable helpers. If it was ever known that Harry Potter engaged in brainwashing wizards and witches into slavery, then magical Britain would probably lose its mind. Which was why there were multiple clauses in the contract to take care of that. A week had passed since Kreacher had been recruited, and his progress had been remarkable under Boppy's tutelage. He was now dressed in a smart, elf-sized butler uniform and holding a staff with a metallic skull mounted at its tip. The Slytherin locket had been separated into two halves, both pieces forged into the staff below the skull. It had been enchanted to activate and the holder spoke the Black family motto, Toujours per. The metal skull would then transform into an 18-inch blade, turning the innocent, if slightly gruesome, stave into a naginata. Chad, for the life of him, could not understand why an Old English pure-blooded wizard family would use "always pure" in French as their motto. Sure, the blood supremacy could be easily explained, but written in French? An Englishman would rather kill himself than promote anything French over English, especially in medieval times. Nevertheless, Kreacher had been extremely pleased with the tribute to the Black family, and downright ecstatic at the fierce metallic skull adorning his personal weapon. It was worth the extra cost for the enchantments if it further galvanized Kreacher's loyalty. But Kreacher's earlier mention of the house elf community had aroused Chad's interest in seeing how the excitable race lived. Unfortunately, it started a chain reaction that had Boppy erupting in tears. Luckily, Chad was back at the Dursley house when he asked Boppy to arrange a tour, as he did not want to trespass in case there were some weird house elf customs. He felt it safer first to quiz his main man Boppy, so he didn't end up making some faux pas and insulting his house elves. That was when Boppy exploded in tears that would have been damaging to his head elf rep if they hadn't been alone. It turned out that Boppy didn't want to mention some new problems that had arisen because he was unsure how his master would take his failure. Words soon tumbled out of the blubbering little guy about how some elves had disrespected Chad by becoming pregnant without his permission. With some further prompting and specific questions, Chad was made aware of some glaringly obvious issues that he should have solved by now. First, the pregnancy thing was fine as he wanted more elves anyway, just as long as it was kept sustainable. The most problematic issue was food. Chad had never actually thought about where his food came from when his house elf chefs brought him his meals, nor how the house elves kept themselves fed. It turns out that they were trained/ordered to raid Muggle farms for the wizard's food and fed themselves from either their wizard family's scraps or went dumpster diving in Muggle trash. They had a whole system to keep the losses for the Muggles explainable, but never really cared at the financial damage they caused. It seems that anger at the persecution from the witch-hunting era had never really been forgiven, just satisfied in other petty ways. It was something that Chad should have noticed by now, as he had yet to see any magical shops selling fresh produce or food other than ice cream or magical treats. There was never any chance that wizards or witches entered the Muggle shops to purchase their food, as they would then be up with the fashion and technology otherwise, even if it was only to blend in. The fact that Arthur Weasley, the most Muggle-loving and tolerant wizard, had no idea the value of Muggle currency was also telling. If it was not for Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, they would have just magically created their own food. Even those without house elves just summoned food and never thought about where it came from. Perhaps the house elves' weak physique was also attributed to their poor diets, but even if it wasn't, Chad would not have his minions eating trash. After he had the whole situation made clear by Boppy, he was a little angry at his head elf. But he quickly realized it was not Boppy's fault. He had been trained by idiot wizards. Boppy, you have made a mistake in carrying out your duties as Peveril head elf. But it is only a minor mistake that is easily solved and a good learning experience for both of us. You should have immediately brought any problem or query you had to me, and I would have given you new orders or cleared up any misunderstanding. From now on, if you are unable to solve a problem yourself, or need my help or permission, you are to bring it to my attention at once. Not doing so only makes the problem worse. In this instance, the pregnancy problem is actually a blessing. However, because you were worried about upsetting me by bringing it to my attention, you have only caused yourself grief and inconvenienced the other elves by having them hide. The easiest way to solve this problem is to recall all our elves and have a meeting. Don't worry, Boppy, you are not in trouble. Just make sure to learn from this misunderstanding. Chad had patiently explained to the devastated elf. It had taken a fair bit of effort to stop the little guy from turning into a Dobby and punishing himself in some horrific way, but eventually, he was back to his old self. Chad was more annoyed with himself for not noticing his house elf's welfare than Boppy not bringing it to his attention, so there was no need for any punishment. He had been doing an excellent job so far, and this minor fault was nothing but stupid wizard logic influencing Boppy. 2 days later, and Chad was admiring his assembled minions. 21 chefs. 33 gardeners. 52 miners. 1,562 ninjas. 2 head elves. A total of 1670 house elves that served him with absolute loyalty. Looking out over the sea of house elves, Chad was once again reminded of the versatility and overpowered *T that magic was capable of. They were in the Godric's Hollow base that had been expanded again to accommodate for the growing elf population and the need for storage space for cash, jewelry and weapons collected by ninjas. Not to mention the auditorium that had been constructed between the storage space and the house elf community. It was basically an underground town created and strengthened by magic to stop it collapsing. My loyal and hard-working house elves, today you are gathered here to address some concerns that head elves Boppy and Creature have brought to my attention, said Chad in a magically enhanced voice to reach all of his elves. He also didn't forget to use this opportunity to boost the head elf status to help him manage his minions. They have mentioned that a few elves have developed relationships and started a family, and asked for my blessing. To all those gathered here today, know that every elf that works for me has my approval to marry and have as many children as they want. All I ask is that you do not overwork yourselves or think you need to have children. I am pleased as long as you are happy. You are my house elves, and I want you to be well rewarded for your faithful service. As such, I was horrified to find out that you are having to eat Muggle leftovers. I am not like those other trash wizards that do not appreciate your hard work and loyalty. You have served me devotedly and performed exceptionally. This must be reciprocated in kind with my appreciation. No more are you to scavenge for food like unappreciated slaves. You will be fed the same as all faithful family retainers of House Peveril. 3 full meals prepared by our chefs with the same ingredients that I, your master, eats. As Chad expected, there was a fair bit of kickback from among the assembled elves. Things like, the same as master, we are not worthy, or a good house elf should not waste proper food, was shouted out by the brainwashed elves. They had been conditioned for hundreds of years, and it was passed down in house elf family lines and into their core values. Which Chad could only thank the wizards for. House elves were the perfect servants, but Chad was not going to let them eat food out of the trash like animals. That was way too excessive. Just like their uniforms and weapons, decent food would be seen as their reward for loyal and dedicated service. The trick was not going too far and giving them ideas to rebel. Luckily, magic bonds and a lifetime of servitude removed that possibility. Chad would just be seen as the god of house elves. Anyone that works for me needs to be well-fed and healthy to carry out their duties. You, my house elves, need to eat well so that you can have enough energy to enjoy your work. If you are tired and weak, how can you savor a job well done? Just like your uniform and assigned tools, eating proper meals is a reward for my house elves being the best in the world. You are the most loyal house elves a wizard could ask for. Please allow me this selfish request as your master. Even Boppy and Creature had tears in their eyes at the thought of their master treating them the same as wizards and allowing marriage and children. Before he could be mobbed by teary-eyed fanatical house elves, Chad had Boppy teleport him back to the Dursleys' house. After giving instructions on dealing with the celebrating house elves at Godric's Hollow, Chad also instructed Boppy to start the new training for house elf chefs to bulk buy ingredients from muggles. Training them to use credit cards and pull off believable illusions was key to his new house elf dietary needs. After making such a glaring mistake in managing his house elves, Chad thought now would be a good time to look over his other minions for any oversights. First on the list was the new recruits that Tookie was training. Chad thought that if there was going to be a problem, a slaving operation run by house elves would definitely be it. But after a guided tour by the uncharacteristically calm elf, Chad had nothing but praises for the elf and only one small change to enforce. Tookie had modeled the servant training after house elf ethics, and one such value was not costing your master galleons that could be better spent elsewhere. This trickled down into Spartan living arrangements that were much like Harry Potter's cupboard under the stairs. Chad could only cringe at the wizards and witches clothed in rags and crammed in tiny cubbyholes. After having Tookie supply them with a standard uniform and create some decent rooms in the underground base that was beneath the Mesopotamian Incorporated building, Chad praised the elf for a job well done. Not one of the recruits had even lasted 2 seconds under the pain enforced by their magical contracts, and if it caused you soul-searing torture to think about certain things, well, you learnt pretty quickly to not think about them. Aside from the clothing and housing dilemma, Tookie was doing well. And after a report on the ninja roaming team and the mining operation in Australia, Chad thought that maybe there were no problems with his people and the house elf thing was a one-off. That was until his ninja elf popped him over to see Crystal. Crystal had somehow managed to buy a building in the heart of the city of London. It was right next to a church where King William Street and Grassetich Street met. She had brought in a team of house elf renovators and quickly had the place looking respectable enough to be the HQ of Elfin Incorporated. However, Chad was puzzled to find out she was alone in the building and the 3 girls that had been recruited to help her were missing. Since none of the new wizard recruits had not yet been trained enough to act as bodyguards, only 2 ninja elves were present to guard her, but they could hardly help Crystal run a business. The shocked reaction when he knocked on the door and the startled deer-in-the-headlights look when she saw who it was, confirmed his suspicions that something was wrong. A quick mind probe soon had him mentally cursing himself for being careless when he examined the page 3 girls' minds. He had only done a brief mind scan to see if they were intelligent enough to help Crystal, not if they were ruthless cheese that would go in for the kill if they smelled blood. Hey, Crystal. Just wanted to stop in and see how the new girls were getting on. Any problems? He asked, knowing full well there were. And no, everything is fine. They are just having the day off after putting in an all-nighter. How have you been? The Dursleys causing you any trouble? Crystal nervously replied, hoping to put Chad at ease and change the topic. Chad sighed at the blatant misdirect attempt and thought it better just to be straightforward. Crystal was just too kind for her own good, and even after experiencing the darker side of humanity, was not ruthless enough to defend herself. Oh. Call them up then, we can have lunch together, and you can introduce me as your son. It will be good to get them used to me as we will see each other often. I don't think that would be a good idea. They must be pretty tired. Oh, okay, then schedule lunch for tomorrow. They also have tomorrow off. She said weakly. Crystal, you do realize that my father left the business for me to run and you to help me, right? If there is a problem, I need to know. And I think you are forgetting that just like with the Dursleys, I can use magic to solve any problems. Crystal was still under the impression that Chad's mysterious father had left him at the Dursley family to hide him from his enemies, and that she was only managing his muggle business for Chad to take over when he was older. Something that he was not going to dissuade her from, much better for her to fear his make-believe father than Chad himself. Knowing that the jig was up, Crystal unburdened herself on him, surprisingly similar to Boppy's episode. There were tears, a bit of blubbering and a whole lot of remorse at having failed Chad. The problem started only a couple of weeks after the three girls started working for the company. They noticed the glaringly obvious massive amounts of money being thrown around and the vast amounts of land that was purchased. With no clear origin for the billions being funneled through the company, the girls quite boldly blackmailed Crystal for their silence. Which in hindsight, was a foolish thing to do. Anyone with that kind of money would have the power to disappear some minor celebrities like them as easily as wiping their arse. Maybe they felt safe after they had teamed up to blackmail Crystal, or thought her the boss since everything was in her name. Their minor fame and public recruitment also could have been behind the courageous act of pissing off a billionaire and blackmailing them for an annual payout of £1 million each. Either way, they had made a severe mistake in trying to steal from a morally bankrupt reincarnator with a penchant for slavery. The fact that Chad had not been brainwashing and enslaving beautiful women in a fictional world he viewed as his personal playground was already an effort. To have them steal from him was the straw that broke the camel's back. Chad knew he was a selfish person that saw his reincarnation into the Potterverse as his chance to indulge in all his desires. Hell, R.O.B could have asked a much steeper price than just ruining Dumbledore's reputation, and he still would have agreed. But Chad knew that with his lack of self-control, he would find it a very slippery slope if he started brainwashing hotties into his bed. Chad was honest enough with himself to know that he had brought this on himself in a misguided attempt at showing he was still good and didn't need to brainwash people to work for him. Wizards automatically got enslaved because he saw them as weapons of mass destruction and too retarded to be left walking around without a leash. But he had fooled himself into believing 3 beautiful Muggle girls would not be a threat. Even his earlier determination to enforce their loyalty was relaxed, and only a Muggle contract was used, not a magical one. Turns out that a non-disclosure meant *T in front of illegal activity, and he had picked these girls for their intelligence, not just their beauty. A mistake he would not make again. From now on, Chad would be doing full scans of a Muggle's memories and directly brainwashing them if they meet his criteria of not innocent enough for a free pass. Convenient for a man that was trying to justify the enslavement of beautiful women. But screw the haters. Chad might be a hypocrite, but he was still going to do as he pleased. As long as he was not the one being enslaved, what did he care? After justifying his atrocious and frankly, inhumane actions, Chad set off to gain himself 3 loyal and dedicated slaves. Don't worry, Crystal. Tomorrow, they will be here as soon as you open the doors and will be dedicated and faithful. Next time, come straight to me if you run into any problems. You must remember that my family has magic and are not hindered by mundane matters like blackmail. Before he popped away, he made sure to boost her self-esteem and resolve using this incident as the foundation. He thought about enhancing her looks with his new plastic surgery magic but decided to leave it for now. They had just gained some media attention and didn't need to be hounded for the source of magical facelifts and boob jobs. With a nod to his ninja elf, he arrived in front of an utterly surprised woman in a bathrobe painting her toenails. Before she could scream, Chad hit her with a stunner. It always amazed him how elves knew where to teleport and never seemed to run into any obstacles when warping reality to their chosen destination. Chad had operated a few times, and with the help of Voldemort's memories, had performed it flawlessly. Even managing to do away with the signature crack noise. But it took concentration and a clear picture of the destination. House elves seemed to do it blindly like they were using the Force or something. The image of Yoda as a house elf caused him to giggle, something that looked very rapey as he stood over a passed-out girl while she was barely clothed. The fact that he was a child just added to the creepiness. Luckily, house elves are not judgmental and have very skewed views of what constitutes as creepy or weird. Delving into her unprotected mind, he rewrote her personality into a devoted minion that would take a bullet for Chad or Crystal. Any personal relationships were to be cut off, and all the money that was stolen returned. Since the girls would have no need for money or a social life outside the company, he planned to have Crystal set up a share house for them. More money for the money god. Saving money was always desirable when it was spent so easily. Land and property was not exactly cheap, and there was a lot of it if Chad wanted to have a monopoly. After repeating the initiation process into indentured servitude with the other 2 wenches and draining their funds, he modified his plans a little. Chad was about to start looking for a hotel to buy, but with this incident, he changed his mind. It reminded him that he needed a team of ruthless individuals that could protect him from future occurrences of backstabbing or legal shenanigans. It was time to bring the unholy scourge of society to his side, or as they were more commonly known, lawyers. Since he was already going for the surrounded by women scenario, he would scout out disgruntled and passed over women solicitors and barristers. There was bound to be quite a few in the late 80s as it was still somewhat of a man's world. Making partner or being promoted up the ladder was generally male-dominated, as men would prefer someone they could relate to and joke around with. That's not to say that women didn't reach higher positions, just that it was a man's club. Men didn't like having to restrain their casual behavior or banter because the ducks were on the pond. Plus, a lot of career women chose work over family and would not have many familial ties. As far as Chad was concerned, it was the perfect pool of recruits. There were bound to be some that he would deem not innocent by his guidelines, and warrant a personality change. As it turned out, surprisingly, there were not that many. After a week of searching, he could only find 1 female barrister and 4 solicitors that barely met the criteria to be enslaved. The barrister knew that her clients were guilty and hid incriminating evidence, and the solicitors took bribes, overcharged, and were stealing money from their vulnerable clients. Not really deserving of being enslaved, but live by the sword, die by the sword. If they were going to take advantage of others using their position and power, then so was Chad. Not that he was trying to be a hero or anything, it just soothed his conscience by not destroying honest lives. With the necessary personality wipe, dedication and loyalty programming, and the added knowledge of the law he picked up from veteran lawyers in his search, he was ready for the next step. Set them up close to the temple area. The temple refers to the area in the vicinity of Temple Church and is one of the central legal districts in London, an important center for English law. It was about 2 kilometers west of the Elfin Inc. HQ, but the competition was harsh with the already old and established firms thoroughly in control. Instead, Chad chose to take a bit of a hit to their prestige, and had Crystal buy the building adjacent to the NatWest Bank. With a building selected and renovated, he outlined what he wanted to achieve with the firm. They would be allowed to handle other clients as long as Chad's empire got priority, and no drama would affect his business. After talking about the future of his new law firm with the old biddy brigade, they touched on the subject of the stock market. The 5 women that made up his new law team were all around 40 and had reached the plateau before any significant position in their companies. Another thing they all had in common was that they all had a stock portfolio. Chad, of course, knew about the stock market but had never had anything to do with it. With perfect recall of his past life thanks to a clemency, he was sitting on a gold mine of profitable companies to invest in. With the idea of setting up a stockbroking firm in the same building as his lawyers, his new building on Fleet Street was ideally placed in between the Temple area and the London Stock Exchange. Walking distance within both regions would compensate for the loss of reputation for not being located in the premier law district. Insider trading and stock manipulation was just as prevalent in women as in men, and so was failed stockbrokers. Chad didn't really care about their skills, just that they had a license to trade and that they were women. He had already touched up the signs of age on his lawyers and did the same on the 3 guilty female stockbrokers he shanghaied. It was nothing drastic and could be easily explained away, he was still trying to stay under the radar after all. But gradual changes over time would have his old cougar workforce looking very shaggable, and only add benefits in their professions. Thanks to his lawyers, all titles and deeds of his Elfin Inc. properties would now be ironclad after they were processed, and any of his more dubious schemes could be screened by them for flaws. They also totally rewrote his magical contracts to be even more unassuming and inescapable, definitely a good investment. His stockbrokers started buying up shares in companies that he remembered being successful. Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Home Depot, Walmart, Microsoft, Apple, Intel, IBM, Sony, Nintendo and Sega were the main ones he remembered. But basically any company he found that was still going strong in 2019 was scrutinized by his stock ladies. They were all long-term investments, but like his gold in storage, would pay off very well. Nokia, Yahoo, Google, Amazon were put on a list to be purchased as soon as they opened on the stock market. Thanks to his brokers being slaves, he didn't need to explain why he wanted to buy shares in corporations that didn't exist yet. There was also the massive stock market crash sometime in 1987. Thanks to his eidetic memory, he remembered it mentioned in a conversation about stock market crashes, but no specific details. As he had never invested before, his knowledge on it was severely lacking. It was not like he knew he would be sent back in time and studied up on it. But a time-turner would fix any oversights in trading. With his lawyers and stockbrokers set up, he could now return to his original goal of being a hotel chain magnate. This was expedited by the lawyers and Crystal's crew working together to give him a list of suitable hotels to purchase. Something in a tourist area was cheap because of its age or disrepair and had at least 5 floors were the critical factors in searching for his new hotel. There were 10 potentials, but Chad was sidetracked yet again after looking at the 6th hotel. Boppy had taken a bullet for him, as tonight was a family outing to some Grunnings party, and he had taken Chad's place for it. Since Harry was in his cupboard dreaming of ways to not be a freak, Chad decided to investigate some of the potential hotels. It was 10 p.m. by the time he and a ninja elf arrived at the site of the 6th hotel. It was in Soho, an area of the city of Westminster, and was formerly a fashionable district for the aristocracy. It has been one of the leading entertainment districts in the capital since the 19th century but saw a sharp decline after a cholera outbreak in 1854. By the 20th century, Soho had a reputation as a base for the sex industry in addition to its nightlife. And that was what Chad was witnessing now. The Soho area has been at the heart of London's sex industry since 1778 when the first brothel was opened. Before the Street Offences Act of 1959 became law, street prostitutes worked in Piccadilly Circus and the streets and alleys around Soho. By the early 1960s, almost every doorway in Soho had red-lit doorbells, or open doors with little postcards just inside advertising large chest for sale or French lessons given. Or so said the scantily clad woman that was definitely over 50 years old. The Sexual Offences Act of 1956, Section 33, states that it is an offense for a person to keep a brothel, manage or assist in the management of a brothel. Listed out the painted Jezebel that was well past her prime. But what about the red door houses? Aren't they brothels? He queried. Chad had been talking to this woman for the past 10 minutes and was fascinated by her encyclopedic knowledge of prostitution. Ah, but by law, a brothel must be used by more than one person to offer sexual services. If only one girl is turning tricks, then that's fine. She answered with a wry smile. The laws regarding prostitution were rather absurd. She further explained that in Great Britain, England, Wales and Scotland, prostitution itself, the exchange of sexual services for money, is legal. But several related activities, including soliciting in a public place, curb crawling, a man in a car, owning or managing a brothel, pimping and pandering, are crimes. But aren't you soliciting in a public place? How does that work? Sonny, I have been doing this since I was 14, there is nothing I haven't seen or done. I can spot a copper coming from a mile away and tell who is looking for a shag. Now do you want to have some fun, or do you need more for your school report? The whore asked hopefully while leering at the illusion of Chad's *LT body. Ah, no thanks. But what can you tell me about that hotel across the street? He asked while handing her a £20 note for her time. Clicking her tongue and squirreling away the cash in her rather ample bosom, the granny hoe gave him a rundown of the hotel's history and its current owner. It seems that the place used to be a cat house but started losing business after the Sexual Offences Act in 1956 and became a regular hotel. The current owner has been trying to sell it for years after inheriting it after his father's death, but not even with its ballroom and bar could it turn a profit. Not appreciating the local nightwalkers or it being a money sink, the owner would accept nearly any decent offer, especially if it was cash. After thinking about it for a while, Chad came up with a plan that was so cunning you could put a tail on it and call it a weasel. Looking at the harlot that showed every bit of her 40-plus years in the profession, he noted her earlier comments about knowing everything there was to know about whoring and that she was not afraid to flout the law. How would you like to own a hotel? Warning. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, locales, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The fact that a person insulting me and commenting negatively on my fanfic shares the same name as a character in this story is merely a coincidence, and in no way an accurate depiction of him, probably. Also, there are some quite graphic scenes insinuated that will most likely make you feel sick imagining them. I can only apologize as it was necessary to emphasize the MC's rant on sexism and how he puts women up on a pedestal. Thanks to his earlier problems caused by holding back on mind reading, Chad had focused on the Lady of the Night's unspoken thoughts as he detailed his plan to buy the hotel in her name. It was clear that she was no Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, as her thoughts revealed her plan to take advantage of this naive idiot and separate as soon as the hotel was bought and paid for in her name. She was a 50-plus old streetwalker that would love to get out of the game, and if a naive young guy wants to buy her a hotel in her name, she was going to keep it. Everything went according to Chad's plan. The owner was more than happy to sell, and with his thoughts revealed, all the building's flaws were eventually brought to light, and consequently, the price was satisfyingly low. With an agreement to meet the next day and sign over the deed for a one-time full cash payment, everyone was happy. Especially Sapphire, the new madam of his soon-to-be cat house, when he informed her after arranging the deal. Since Chad was playing the role of the devil, he offered Sapphire the chance to have all her friends employed by him as well. Any freelance professional that wanted a job would receive a £5,000 sign-on bonus tomorrow after everything was settled. If there were such beings as devils, Chad certainly saw the appeal in setting up humans to fall from their greed. The only difference was that he didn't care about their souls, just their free will. The next day, Chad and one of his solicitors arrived at 10 a.m. and met an unsurprisingly punctual Sapphire. Who wouldn't be if you were going to receive a free building? An hour later, the owner had handed over the keys and left since he had sold the place fully furnished and had nothing to take. Then the hookers started to arrive with greed shining in their eyes. It was like a feeding frenzy as scantily clad Hagrid slappers jumped at the opportunity for free money when all they had to do was sign Sapphire's employee register. Chad didn't even bother setting up contracts, either magical or mundane, as he was going to directly enslave and brainwash these wenches when they didn't show up tomorrow for work. It was a little roundabout, but it amused Chad to watch them dance around laughing at the naive fool throwing money away. None of them noticed Dippy and his elves taking note of them and doing whatever it was that elves did to know how to find people. The following day witnessed the image of a cheerful young adult whistling as he made his way to the old run-down hotel. Stepping inside the grimy, mildew-infested hotel ballroom had him coming face to face with Sapphire wearing a smile full of schadenfreude. "Hey, Sapphire, ready to build the city's most renowned brothel?" Chad happily asked. "Yes, but I have been thinking about the future and found a way to double my profits," she said with a hint of malice. "Really? That's amazing. What is it? Cut you out of the equation. Since you so generously allowed me to sign the deed in my name, I don't see why I need you any longer." Her crooked smile and the way she watched for his reaction spoke of her vindictiveness. Maybe it was because he was a man and she had to spend most of her life on her knees just to earn enough to survive, or perhaps it was because she was an evil B***tch that took pleasure cheating people out of money. Either way, Chad's reaction was not what she was expecting. He laughed in her face. "I suppose the women that signed on yesterday won't be coming in then? Are you stupid? Why would they come back when you have already given them money? You don't even know their names or where they live." Chad just smiled again. He would wait another 5 minutes to the agreed-upon time before he sent out Dippy and his team to retrieve his new hardworking sluts. "There is only one problem with your thinking, Sapphire. That you were the only one to think of cutting out their partner's profits. I already knew you and your fellow dumpster friends were going to double-cross me. I even encouraged it. Do you really think someone with that much cash would be ignorant to the way the world works? I dropped pound 260000 alone on the Jezebels. Did you not wonder how I had that much cash on me to throw around? Why none of you ever thought of celebrating or spending the money you now had? Congratulations, Sapphire, you made a deal with the devil, and now it's time to pay the price." As he finished his redundant speech, as she was about to be brainwashed, Chad clicked his fingers. Unconscious women started to appear on the floor that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Sapphire's face had gone pale with fear, and she began to back away from Chad, who now wore a smile much more malicious than the one she had graced him with just moments ago. "No, please. I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Sorry for what, whore? Didn't know what? That you shouldn't take advantage of others? I could have just subjugated you without the whole song and dance, but this way is much more satisfying. It also takes away any guilt I would have had by enslaving you sluts and working you hard. Welcome to the Devil's Playroom," said Chad dramatically. Watching Sapphire's breakdown was pretty fun. He could certainly see the appeal of Bond villains revealing their plan to the emotional devastation of their victims. But unlike James Bond, there was no escape after the big reveal for Chad's enemies. He made sure of it. Among the new brothel workers, there were a few that had children, but luckily they were all above the age to have moved out as soon as they could. Sapphire's acquaintances were all similar in age to her, and the younger ones were the children of some of them that had been tempted for easy money. Chad didn't read the minds of the prostitutes, as he had no particular interest in sifting through their no doubt very disturbing lives and scarring himself with images of granny porn. Surface thoughts were as far as he went, and their betrayal was enough of a reason to set them up in his new brothel. Especially since he read the thoughts of one of the old whores, a Mrs. Gale. The things he saw in just her surface thoughts galvanized the need to not dig any deeper. It was disturbing how she willingly turned her own son into a rent boy and even make use of his services herself. Her last thoughts were of her now-grown soy boy son David, and how she would never get to love him anymore. Her fond memory of his overstretched orifices leaking spunk after gangbangs were so sickening that Chad made sure to designate Mrs. Gale to take all the degenerate customers to unleash their sick fantasies on. Chad thought it would be better to put David out of his misery, as his life was worse than an abused animal kept in a cage to breed. But he supposed that even if David was trained into a human-cum dumpster, he deserved to live out his life however he wanted. Probably by annoying people while saying YOLO and pretending to be mature. The poor unfortunate soy boy, at least there would be the SJW movement for him to join later on in his life. The rest of the day was spent turning the 52 new sex workers into gorgeous women that looked no older than 25 and had all the right curves in all the right places. Since the newly named hotel, that he had thought of during his torment of Sapphire, had 4 floors with 15 rooms each level, there were enough rooms for the ladies to now permanently reside here. During the takeover of his new employees, Chad noticed that they all lived in council houses. Since they would be of no further use to them, as everything they owned now belonged to their master, he was struck by another business venture. The council tenants were given the right to buy in the Housing Act of 1980, offering a discount price on their council house that gave over 5 million council house tenants in the UK the right to buy their home from their local authority. This was cheap housing that was just asking to be bought, and Chad planned to exploit it. With his team of lawyers and his magical servants becoming ready to serve after their training, he prepared for Elfin Inc. to make a killing. With Elfin Inc. already focusing on buying up houses in impoverished areas, renovating them, and renting them out again, this would be the perfect target. Having the tenants buy the house with his money, sell it legally to Elfin Inc. for a one-time cash payout of £1,000, and then continue to pay rent to Elfin Incorporated. With his wizard slaves able to confuse tenants to sign contracts, and any legal problem solvable by magic, Chad planned to own every council house ever built. The money needed to achieve this was astronomical and would keep his ninja elves in constant work. With the Devil's Playground nightclub renovations and operating procedures set up, Chad could finally concentrate on his hotel scheme. After buying the 5-story sh*T hole and seeing the problems that would occur if he bought old buildings, he decided to just build from scratch. This would cost a lot more and take time, but he could then mold his Alfheim hotel chain's image to a set standard instead of a renovated and unalterable building. With grand ideas now floating around in his head, he called for another meeting with his overworked real estate and law firm employees. Since he had gimps to make his dreams happen, Chad just needed to give them the basics of what he wanted and have them solve the problems to make it happen. If any further outside help was needed, well, he was sure some corrupt people in that profession could be recruited to his team. The main outline he gave them consisted of the following. Xenotation spot: go big and build a 72-story hotel with restaurants and bars. Xenotation spot: adjoining building for entertainment, swimming pool, movie theater. Xenotation spot: a nice square building, not a fancy schmancy architect's wet dream. Xenotation spot: everything built to the highest standard with the best materials. Xenotation spot: house elf contractors for cosmetic work. Xenotation spot: top 2 floors are Chad's private suite/apartment. Xenotation spot: at least 2,000 rooms. Xenotation spot: lifts/elevators, 40. Xenotation spot: all window rooms are deluxe or suites. Xenotation spot: standard rooms are better than deluxe rooms in other hotels. Xenotation spot: cost less than 600 million. Chad wanted it to be the pinnacle of extravagance and be seen as the new standard of luxury hotels. He knew there was a lot of time, work and effort involved in a project of this scale, but he had magic and tireless slaves to overcome any obstacles. As he sat in the meeting room at Elfin Inc. waiting for his minions to bring him the preliminary details needed to start his bold new venture, he was happy to hear a new hit song that he had liked in his past life on the radio. Holy sh*T. To control the media is to control the world. TV and radio news programs, newspapers, magazines, and to fund it I could make my own recording label and sign future popular bands and artists. Chad thought to himself, suddenly struck with another idea in his quest for owning the world. He had so many ideas that needed money and time, that when he finally got his Hogwarts letter, he would probably be begging for the quiet period it would bring because of the watchful eye of Dumbledore. For the last week, Chad had been living in a cupboard under some stairs. And it had been magnificent. It had been 5 years since he started his minions on the path of building him a hotel chain and controlling the media, and it had ended up snowballing into so much work. In another week, Harry Potter would turn 11 and be visited by Hagrid. Not taking any chances, Chad had moved into the freak's cupboard and reapplied Dumbledore's tracking spells onto his body in preparation. He had also managed to magically convince Dudley that he had used his freakishness to take his place as the much-loved child of the Dursleys. Thanks to the school year being over, and plans for both children enrolling in different schools, Chad didn't have to worry about mix-ups in public with any friends they made. Dudley would discard the friends Boppy had made with his persona, and an illusion of a healthy Dudley would continue until he reached Smeltings. With Chad's dark looks and mimed impotent rage at the inability to tell the Dursleys about role reversal of the children, Dudley, the smug little psycho, jumped straight into his new position as a normal child. He didn't even question the fact that Chad did no chores. 2 weeks before his birthday should be enough time for whatever magical book records his address. Chad needed it to register that lived under the stairs, and since it seemed to describe the size of different rooms, he had not altered it with spatial magic. Honestly, Chad had been looking forward to the time off. With the restrictions placed on him by Dumbledore's tracking spells, he could no longer teleport around with impunity. This was the perfect excuse to take a holiday from all the work his grand schemes had created for himself. Building a 72-floor hotel in Mayfair, an upscale district of London, was an undertaking requiring many hours of work to get approvals and permission just to be allowed to start building. Then had come the designing phase that needed to account for all of Chad's unreasonable ideas and extravagance. When they finally broke ground and construction started, people appeared out of the woodwork to oppose him and cause trouble. Whether it was snobs living in Mayfair complaining about not being the right sort or corrupt inspectors looking to make some easy money, every cliché villain came to bother him. Thankfully, he had magic. Chad was so annoyed by the interruptions to the building schedule that his responses had been a little harsh. All the upper-class muckety-mucks had been mind-read and brainwashed into signing everything they owned over to Chad once their deepest and darkest secrets had been found out. There had only been 2 out of the whole group that was only guilty of being arrogant and annoying. They had been persuaded that a luxury hotel was just what Mayfair needed. The inspectors had just been directly inducted into his workforce to help smooth any further obstacles to his plans. His brothel had been a roaring success after he had his waitresses visit every pub/nightclub and advertise the Devil's Playground. With a wizard slave to empower contracts for first-timers with hidden clauses to keep anyone from speaking out about the special service that could be requested, there had been few problems. One was complaints from scorned wives and girlfriends, and the other was a couple of corrupt cops wanting some protection money. Nothing that could not be solved with magic, the most powerful and versatile tool to ever be wielded. The corrupt cops had been another light bulb moment, and Chad's insidious influence began to spread throughout law enforcement. Anyone on the take had been inducted into a new secret club, the Chad Association, that had rewards for service. Ripping off the law enforcement organization from the Mentalist, Chad even had the Tiger password but was not stupid enough to tattoo his members, at least not with mundane means. With Voldemort's memories, it was simplicity itself to have the creepy red John Smiley face appear on their hands when the password was spoken. Then had come the report that his mining teams had run into wizards while stripping valuable minerals from the ground in Australia. The wizards had been promptly overwhelmed by the elves and physically knocked out and secured. Chad had teleported over there after creating his own port key to oversee the situation and come up with a solution. After reading their minds, and finding out that the Australian wizard community consisted of under 2,000 members that were scattered over the country except for the magical town in Sydney, the solution was simple. Enslave them all. With their obsession for Quidditch, the Australian wizards practically all knew each other. After brainwashing the first few and using them as a means of infiltration, the rest quickly fell like dominoes under an elven assault. The majority signed the magical book of slavery after some persuasion from house elf interrogators led by Creature, and the stubborn ones were directly brainwashed by Chad. It had the added bonus of practicing his legilimency, though very few were trained in occlumency. When even the ICW representative had been forced to sign a magical contract, Chad had reassessed the mining operation. In typical house elf fashion, they had gone a bit overboard and nearly stripped everything of value from the earth. Luckily, Chad had told them to leave the iron ore alone, giving Australia at least one mineral to mine to boost its economy. Examining the vast tracts of land that Crystal had continued to buy up in southwestern Australia, he found he owned most of the area from Perth across to Kalgoorlie and then down to Esperance, giving him ownership over most of the peninsula. Since he owned what passed for the magical Australian government, the Muggle government was now unprotected from his meddling. Following the lead of Leonard Castley, who declared himself independent of Australia in 1970, Chad took advantage of the British Treason Act of 1495 and declared an illusion version of himself king. The Treason Act stated that the de facto king of a nation cannot be guilty of treason concerning any action against the lawful king, and that anyone who interfered with that monarch's duties could be charged with treason. In a move that caused much public outcry and controversy, the Australian government acknowledged Chad's claim as legitimate after winning the majority vote in Parliament. With legal standing and compulsions from elves, anyone south of Perth or within Chad's kingdom cheaply sold up and moved elsewhere. The urge to migrate was easily explained away when people realized that they would be cut off from any government services like roads, electricity, hospitals, or water, as it all ran through his land. The act of succeeding from Australia took a momentous amount of man-hours spent recruiting lawyers, politicians, and anyone else needed to make it happen. Chad even had to directly control all forms of media to stem the tides of the backlash from losing the same amount of land as Victoria, not to mention the displacement of people living there. But when their own government made it legal and squashed others that tried to do the same, there was little the public could do about it. Especially when no one really went further than voicing disapproval, those that actually physically protest are always the minority and generally looked down on as hippies. Because of the need for security with the public outcry from his antics, Chad had created a security firm from any criminal his elves could find. Not keen on brainwashing them individually and them not having enough internal magic to power the pain spells in the standard contract, he had to write up another that just killed disobedient people outright. It was very uneconomical, but at least the meat didn't go to waste with his acromantula and dragon farms that were created. They also recruited in groups and made examples of the more unruly Muggle criminals to keep the deaths down. With his new kingdom clearly marked and barred from Muggles, Chad relocated every magical animal worth keeping to his land. Much like the mundane wildlife in Australia, the magical ones were also dangerous. 3 that stood out were the billywig, lethifold, and the Antipodean opali. The billywig had a long, thin stinger at the bottom of its body and was insanely fast. Anyone stung by a billywig would suffer giddiness followed by levitation, which is what gave the billywig a rating of XXX. The lethifold, also known as the living shroud, is a carnivorous and highly dangerous magical beast. It is also considered a dark creature because of its highly aggressive and violent nature, attacking at night when its prey is asleep by suffocating and then digesting it. It had an XXXXX and Chad ordered them killed on sight. Then there was the Antipodean opali, a breed of dragon native to New Zealand, but was known to migrate to Australia in search of territory. It was also rated XXXXX but was not particularly aggressive, just a pest that rarely killed unless it is hungry. Any found were overwhelmed by ninjas and moved to the dragon habitat that was created to be raised for ingredients/materials. It was not the only habitat that was created in his kingdom, as the unicorns and acromantulas were abducted from the Forbidden Forest overnight using a house elf army and storage trunks. The acromantulas were beaten into spinning silk in exchange for kangaroos and rabbits, a common pest that was in abundance in Australia. The unicorns were just fenced off in a section of bush and left alone until he needed hair or horns. There was so much work that continued to snowball from his ideas that it kept Chad, and especially his minions, always busy. Especially once things were stable in Australia and he moved his operations to Africa's east coast to repeat the process once again. Chad had also concentrated on producing a media and entertainment branch of his empire, either buying, enslaving, or creating his own news, TV and radio programs, recording label, and acting agency. With his eidetic memory of the future, he knew who to recruit and soon had a lot of future big names in both the music and movie industry signing with his companies. Most of the time it only took throwing money at new bands or actors that were just starting out, but Chad was not afraid to influence the stubborn ones. But he had to be a bit wary of the MACUSA, Magical Congress, when operating in the USA. They had very stringent laws and was heavily policed after having to deal with numerous wizarding criminals who had fled to America from Europe and beyond. Really, by the time that Chad, or rather Harry Potter, was supposed to receive his letter, he was relishing the chance to relax and play some video games in a cupboard. He was looking forward to shoving all his responsibilities onto his minions, further increasing their already heavy workloads, and acting like a kid without the weight of the world on his shoulders. Dumbledore's machinations would be a welcome change of pace from the tedious decision-making for his growing companies. Hogwarts would be a much-needed holiday, and annoying Snape and Dumbledore with his shenanigans, his reward. Any day now he would be receiving his letter of introduction into the spotlight of magical Britain. The days quickly passed by peacefully. Since all Chad's meals were prepared by his chef elves, he only left the cupboard to go to the toilet. 2 full weeks of playing video games that he had not played since he was a child was his idea of a nice break. Because he had Jedi mind tricked the Dursleys to leave him alone until they received his Hogwarts letter, Chad did not have to act like a retard and hand his own letter over to Vernon. Petunia got the mail instead. On the 24th of July 1991, shrieking and cries of outrage were heard throughout the house. Soon there was thumping on his cupboard door, but he merely leaned out and hit them with another compulsion to keep ignoring him until the place was flooded with hundreds of letters. He also made sure they didn't try to move him to Dudley's spare bedroom because of the address it was mailed to, much better to use it as ammunition later. They continued to receive a letter every day addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. After the dodgy job of boarding up the letterbox, letters begin to appear rolled up inside eggs and down the chimney. That was until the 29th when 30 or 40 letters come pouring out of the fireplace. Uncle Vernon has had enough. He packed everyone into the car and drove around for hours. They finally end up in Cokeworth and stay the night in the Railview Hotel in an attempt to outrun the multitude of letters that persisted in arriving for Harry. The effort was in vain, as about 100 messages were delivered to the hotel the following morning. Vernon Dursley disposed of them, then left the hotel and heading for a hut on a rock out on the sea in his latest attempt to escape magical mail. Throughout the event, Chad made sure not to touch any of the letters just in case and had his elves collect every one of them that came to be hidden under the house. Vernon only ever destroyed copies created by his magical minions. He also reinforced Dudley's joy at being normal, and that he was glad Harry was now the freak. And then, on a dark and stormy night, in all his glory, Hagrid made his entrance. Chad honestly loved this bit in canon, as it showed just how much of a lovable doofus the half-giant was. He just needed to force Dumbledore to throw away the loyal/brainwashed servant so Chad could make use of him. After 3 crashing booms against the door to the shabby hut, it fell to the ground, and the nightmarish scene of a monstrous figure entering to a terrified family occurred. If Chad didn't know what was happening and didn't have his magic, he probably would have been packing his dax as well. "Sorry about that," said the clueless half-giant as he lifted the fallen door back into place. "I demand that you leave at once, sir. You are breaking and entering." Quite rightfully declared Vernon fearfully, while pointing his double-barrel shotgun at Hagrid. With total disregard of the law and general mood of the room, Hagrid just bent the barrel of the gun while insulting the quivering mound of flesh. "Dry up, Dursley, you great prune." This caused Vernon to fire both barrels in panic and blast a hole through the second floor of the shack. "Boy, I haven't seen you since you were a baby Harry, but you look just like your father," Hagrid boisterously bellowed, correctly identifying Chad since he wasn't hiding behind a pillar, and Dudley was not a chubster thanks to his meddling and the power of magic. "You know me?" Chad asked, playing along. He was currently illusioned to look like the skinny, bespectacled slave with a scar on his head that Mrs. Figg reported to Dumbledore. "Well, of course I do. I was a friend of your parents." "Oh, that reminds me, I got something for you. Afraid I might have sat on it at some point, but imagine it will taste fine just the same. Baked it myself, words and all." "Thank you. Not every day that your young man turns 11 now, is it?" After handing over a cake that actually looked edible, Hagrid sat down in front of the fireplace and magically lit it with his illegal wand. Continuing his performance as a clueless 11-year-old seeing magic for the first time, Chad made all the right noises of astonishment before asking who the F***ck this magic-wielding stranger was. "Excuse me, but who are you?" "Rubius Hagrid. Keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts." "Of course, you would know all about Hogwarts." "Sorry, no." "Is it a place where sick pig farmers live?" asked Chad, taking the piss. "Sick pig farmers? Blimey Harry, it's a school for magic. Didn't you wonder where your parents learned it all?" "I'm afraid all I was told about my parents was that they were worthless drunks and layabouts that died in a car crash." "What?" While Hagrid ranted and raved at the Dursleys for being trash, Chad had the cake swapped out for one prepared by his elves. Who knew what potions it had been laced with? Since Chad never let the cake go, Dudley never ate some and got a pigtail in retribution, although Vernon did take a slap to the face from a meaty half-giant hand when Chad continued to stir the pot. After the shouting and threats were done, Hagrid then went about making himself comfortable. In true ruthless fashion, or maybe just oblivious to fundamental human interaction, Hagrid proceeded to spend the night in the tiny shack with the family he just terrorized. Chad thought it was absolutely hilarious, but couldn't work out which category Hagrid fell into, bumbling and harmless or ruthless and cunning. Either way, he made the rather unfortunate mistake of sleeping near a legilimency expert. The next day saw the long commute from the island off the coast all the way to London to get Harry's shopping for school done. Before they left, Chad made sure that he was dressed in rags that would shame him when he was seen wearing them. First impressions were important, and he wanted to be seen as a slave. During the trip, Chad made sure to ask basic questions of the magic world, just like any other curious 11-year-old would. There was a good chance that Dumbledore would be scanning Hagrid's mind, and Chad needed it to be as untouched as he could for his plans to work. Too much interference with Hagrid's memories would be a warning sign if investigated carefully. Arriving at the leaky cauldron, Chad was ready to put his best foot forward, greeting everyone politely and shaking their hand if they offered. He was not a clueless child to be overwhelmed by well-wishers and did his best to appear humble and polite. The perfect image of a poor orphan angel. If anyone took note of his clothes, they didn't mention it or show any signs that they did. A pale young man made his way forward, very nervously. One of his eyes was twitching. Professor Quirrell. Harry, Professor Quirrell will be one of your teachers at Hogwarts, said Hagrid. P.P. Potter, stammered Professor Quirrell, grasping Harry's hand, can't tell you how pleased I am to meet you. Chad had been wondering if this universe followed the book or the movie since planning for this day, and with Quirrell shaking his hand without flaming death, it seems it continued to follow the book. So far it had, as characters looked different than the movie actors. Which was a shame. Chad had been hoping to have Hagrid force them into a private room for breakfast if Quirrell had been carrying Voldemort around with him. Instead, a team of house elf ninjas would tail him to wherever the spirit was residing after he failed to rob the bank. Quirrell was only possessed after he fails to steal the package from Gringotts. Not taking his failure well, Voldemort decides to share Quirrell's body to make sure he doesn't make any more mistakes. But it was far more likely he needed to leech off Quirrell's soul to gain strength. Not to matter, everything was still okay. Instead of Plan A, Hagrid made his apologies, and they left to enter the alley. Hagrid also continued to fill in the blanks about the fame of Harry Potter as he opened the path to Diagon Alley. It was time to see how Dumbledore would solve Harry's financial problems. They walked down the alley admiring all the organized chaos while Hagrid pointed out the shops they would need to visit. Walking through the Gringotts entrance, Chad once again mentally scoffed at the clever riddle that didn't even faze school children before they successfully robbed the place. After Hagrid offhandedly insulted the goblins in a not-so-quiet voice, they arrive at a teller that was supposedly the head goblin in charge of all goblins. Ahem. Mr. Harry Potter wishes to make a withdrawal, stated Hagrid. Ah. And does Mr. Harry Potter have his key? The creepy sharp-toothed gremlin asked as he peered down at Chad. He was unsure if the goblins would see through his elf-made illusions, but wasn't too worried even if they did. After all, Hermione could get away with being polyjuiced, and Hagrid seemed to have no problem using Harry's key without any identification in canon. Why would they cause him problems now? Not to mention that they didn't bar wanted criminals or report illegal artifacts stored in vaults. Oh, wait a minute. Got it here somewhere. Aha! Here's the little devil. Oh, and there's something else as well. Professor Dumbledore gave me this. It's about you-know-what in vault you-know-which. Hagrid replied after patting himself down, seeking the key. He then handed over the key, and a letter addressed to the head goblin. Very well. Everything then continued as it did in canon, except Griphook took them to a different vault that Dumbledore obviously set up for Harry. With everything looted from Godric's Hollow by Boppy, there was no way that Dumbledore could access the Potter vaults. And since he was trying to introduce an abused orphan of a rich and famous house back into the magical community, he could hardly have the Harry Potter create a loan like other needy students. He would be skinned alive if anyone found out. Since Hogwarts tuition was free thanks to the Ministry of Magic, all he needed to do was create the illusion that Harry had a trust fund by creating another vault under his name. Maybe it would cause too many problems to just ask for a new key or lead to unwelcome questions. Like who was his godparents, current legal guardians, or why the Potters' last will and testament were not executed. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.